Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Wonderdraft here on the Wooden Otter. Today, I'm going to be showing you a useful online tool you can use to create interesting landforms while maintaining that all-important realism. So strap in as we dive into another awesome fantasy map with Wonderdraft. So this is an online tool. It is a website called Floodmap.net. And basically what this is it is an amalgamator website for flood map data by NASA and some other sources that have projected what would happen if sea levels would rise or fall. I mean, not that sea levels are falling, but it aggregates this data gathered by these official organizations like NASA and NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. It's the weather for America. Basically, it's the National Weather Service. And what it allows you to do is to simulate what would happen when you raise or lower sea levels simply by typing in a number and hitting set. Now, before I show you this, I just want to give you an idea about the historic highs and lows of sea levels on Earth. So I've done a little layman's research just on Wikipedia, and I found this article simply titled Past Sea Level. And on the right side of this page, there is a graph, basically, that shows two different models for sea levels throughout geologic time, basically, in terms of millions of years ago. So the older data is further to the right, and you can tell from this red line, he found that at one point in the Ordovician period, which is somewhere between 450 and 500 million years ago, the sea level was as much as 400 meters higher than it was today. Down here, basically in the Neogene, which is basically present day, like in terms of geological time, it's still present day, the sea levels were as much as 50 meters lower than they are today. So keep in mind these two numbers. It's anywhere between negative 50 in terms of meters below current sea level and positive 400. Those are the two numbers that we're going to be using in the flood map tool in order to alter Earth's maps in order to generate fantasy maps. So here we are on floodmap.net. We've got those two numbers in mind. Remember, negative 50 meters up to positive 400 meters. This is obviously a map of the globe. And over here on the left, you can see this box. It just says elevation, height, water level, plus or minus. So if you set it to 0, it is, more or less, today's current shoreline maps. If you were to go to the far extremes of those two numbers that we remembered, starting with negative 50, this is the lowest sea level as recorded during the last ice age when more water was locked up in the polar ice caps. So it's a really powerful tool for simulating that. And then we can go to the opposite end of the spectrum and say 400 meters. This is what the globe should theoretically look like if we were at the highest water level in all of history today. You can see that 3/4 of Russia is missing, Europe is decimated, Africa's turned into a series of islands, Brazil is its own little island, the core of the United States is basically missing, and now, you know, the Hudson Bay has touched the Gulf of Mexico and taken out basically, you know, more than 50% of North America. And Alaska has turned into basically a series of small islands. The reason I'm showing you this tool and the extremes is that if you're looking for a new landform, a new coastline shape, this is a really good tool for making something that is random, new, and yet still informed by the realism of the planet Earth. So, like, the shape of the islands north of Australia still follow that general rule of, hey, there's two tectonic plates interacting here, and you can kind of see that shape in the slope or the sweep of these islands, but the actual shape of the islands is totally different. And you can, of course, change things. You know, you don't have to go to 400 meters. You could be real slight and say, I'm going to say it's just 50 meters higher. So look at the coastline of this peninsula. It's definitely changed because we've lost a lot of this landmass, but you could absolutely make a fantasy map just of this bay and just call it, you know, give it new names, trace this out, use this as inspiration in Wonderdraft, trace this out, and now you have a fantasy landform, but it is informed by the realism of the planet Earth. I am currently DMing a game, and in my world that I've made, it's an alternate reality of the Mediterranean Sea. I really do like that idea, using something that is pinned down in the real world. The world of Conan the Barbarian is set in Europe, basically. It's set around the Mediterranean Sea. It's, you know, a fantasized version of it, obviously, where there's monsters and different kingdoms, and it's set in a different time period, but it is still the Mediterranean Sea. And the man who wrote Conan the Barbarian actually admitted as such, and he has drawn maps where he's, you know, documented Conan's travels, and it is in fact set in the Mediterranean. So I kind of ripped off that idea, or rather it inspired me. So I like the idea of using the Mediterranean Sea as the Starfinger Sea in my D&D game. I like to just fool around with these sea level settings until we get something that we can transport into Wonderdraft. So we can totally use this as our fantasy coastline without making it so obvious as to what we're using as inspiration. It's still going to be kind of obvious, but there's another trick that I'm going to show you when we actually get into Wonderdraft. So I'm going to use the snipping tool. So here we are in photos with the snip I took of the website, and I'm going to manipulate it in two ways. One, I'm going to rotate it so that it is a little less recognizable than the existing Mediterranean with a slightly different coastline. And that's just to make it so that my characters, my players, don't immediately recognize it as such, and maybe just extend that suspension of disbelief a little bit longer. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to transform this into as much of a black and white photo that I can possibly do. I picked up this trick from watching another YouTuber, Icarus Games, which, if you're watching this video, you're probably familiar with who that guy is. He's great, and I picked this trick up from him for importing. I think he used it for hand-drawn maps. I'm using it for this, and you'll see in the future it's going to take a little extra work, but I think it's worth it. So first things first, rotate my map. Looks a little more fantasy now. It's at least different orientation so that they don't immediately see Italy sticking out into the Mediterranean. The next thing I'm going to do is go over here to Edit and Create, and just go down to Edit, which brings up the Photos editing software, and I can go to Filters, and down here at the bottom is Vanilla. And I find that Vanilla, when importing into Wonderdraft, generates the best results. It's not perfect, especially not in this case, considering our photo involves these menus here, these little boxes, but we'll get to that in a second. So you apply the filter, and then you select Save a Copy. I'm going to save it as the same name in the same spot, but with BW at the end for black and white. Hit Save, and you're done in Photos. So here we are, finally ready to get started in Wonderdraft, and the first thing we're going to do is open up a brand new map. So now that my map has generated, it is as simple as going up to the import menu, finding your drawing, your photo, wherever you saved it. Here it is for me, Starfinger C, black and white, BW, and hitting open. Now you'll immediately notice, besides drawing in all of the coastlines that I need, it also copied over all of the black typing for the country names. And the white boxes on the photo came over as landmass. So this is an imperfect way to do this, but it is the best option that I have been able to come up with so far. So this is basically a starting point for editing this map into something usable. And the way I can do that is by basically zooming in on certain parts and cleaning them up. So I'm on land, I can just grab the eraser tool and get rid of this OpenStreetMap dialog box in order to clean up this corner. And you can basically continue to do that for the entire map, and it will eventually turn into something usable. So here we have our cleaned up Starfinger sea map based off of a different sea level in the Mediterranean. Now, in order to make this a little more fantastical and even less recognizable, we're going to use the landmass lasso and just kind of manipulate some of these islands and things so that they're in slightly different positions, and hopefully making this even less recognizable as the Mediterranean. So now it's definitely less recognizable as the Mediterranean, I think, but still informed by the real world. So from here, we can do things like add symbols, add titles, add political boundaries, which I'm absolutely going to do. We can color the map as always, but this is the general gist of how you take something from the real world, maybe manipulate the sea height to get a new landmass, a new coastline, alter the picture, import it into Wonderdraft, clean it up, and just like that, you have a brand new, inspired by the real world, yet fantasy map. Well guys, that's going to have to be it for this episode of Wonderdraft. We covered a lot in this episode, but this is, I think, a great stepping off point for further map development. So if you enjoy these videos, if you like this series, and you like my realistic maps, feel free to give me a thumbs up or a subscription below. I would certainly appreciate it. And regardless, I will catch you guys next time here on the Wooden Otter. Peace!